بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا تأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم إنا نستهديك لأرشد أمرنا وزدنا علما ينفعنا وعملا يرفعنا وأحوالا وأخلاقا ترضى بها عنا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم افتح علينا بحكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. صلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah, a warm welcome to one and all to episode 11 of the Rasa'i'l Readings series, where Alhamdulillah we've had and continue to have opportunities to read through various Rasa'il and treatises from across the Hanafi scholarly tradition. And Alhamdulillah, as we have now entered into the blessed month of Sha'ban, Allahumma barik lana fi Rajab wa Sha'ban wa balighna Ramadan, and we are mere days away from the blessed month of Ramadan. Alhamdulillah, we've been blessed and inspired with an opportunity excuse me, to read a risala on the laws of fasting. So this text is the مظهر الأنوار في أحكام الصيام. Of course, it seems that the author simply called it مظهر الأنوار. So أحكام الصيام on the front cover here is merely clarifying what the text is actually about. And then you have على مذهب الحنفية, which again is not part of the author's specification or demarcation of the title, but it's merely excuse me, specifying in accordance with whom. So in this case, in accordance with the Hanafi masters. So this is the manifestation of lights on the laws of fasting. And Alhamdulillah, this is a very Mubarak text. It's probably the most expansive text on the fiqh of fasting that I've certainly come across. And you might find a lot of masalas, for example, in some of the more expansive works, but as a standalone text, which is specific to the subject at hand, there is nothing like it. The text itself is some, well, at least this printed edition now, this is the latest edition, which just came out, and that's of course the cover that you can see on the screen right now. This is some 800 pages. So this is not only the matn itself, because the matn was composed by our author here. So now we've traversed all the way to Bilad as-Sind, a place of tremendous scholarship, generally speaking, but also specifically for the Hanafis, even in across the last few hundred years, some tremendous scholarship which has manifested and is now published and available. And part of that is actually this work by a Shaykh al-Imam Muhammad Hashim ibn Abdul Ghafoor al-Sindi al-Harithi al-Hanafi. It's a 12th century scholar. If you're familiar, some of you might be familiar with another individual, another great Shaykh Sindi scholar, who was also quite influential, and that is Muhammad Abid Sindi. I don't want to restrict the entire Sindi tradition into two, but these are famous individuals, and sometimes the fame manifests as a result of the publication of their work. So alhamdulillah, we're blessed that we have access to the Sindi tradition and the great works that they have produced. So the Madhar al-Anwar is a matn which was written by the author, which is based upon the Kanzu Daqa'iq and the Wiqayatul Riwaya. So the Kanz by Hafizuddin Nasafi and the Wiqaya by Sadr Sharia. Well, it's the grandfather of Sadr Sharia al-Thani, right, or Sadr Sharia al-Asghar. So he wrote the Wiqaya, which is Mahbubi. So he is Mahbubi versus Nasafi's Kanz. So first he composed this matan, and then he wrote the commentary on it, which is some 700 or so pages, as I just showed you in this new copy which has come out. Of course, there's also the older edition of it. This is my edition as well, while the other one is the newer edition. This is the older edition, which is published. This is published in Pakistan. Yeah. So this one's published in Karachi, in Pakistan. And there is no significant difference between the two copies, other than, of course, there's going to be tasheeh of anything which requires tasheeh, because it's revisiting the text after a period of time. They also have all of the hadiths in a different color, and also some of the some important points in different places. They have it, so it's kind of a two-color edition. But the one thing they did omit, which is, I guess, expected, given that it corresponds to normal protocol when it comes to the production of critical editions of commentary, literature, and the like, which is that they omitted the actual method. So the benefit of actually the Pakistani edition, just for anybody who's interested, is that they do actually have the method. Again, I can show you here. You can see there's the method at the top, and then they have the sharh underneath. So it's a lot easier to kind of locate something if you're looking for it. Of course, the index can be helpful, but sometimes if you're just kind of dipping in, I personally find that also to be of benefit. But the one thing which they did add, which is quite useful in this Dar al-Fath edition, it's the same. It's the same editor, so it's not. So it's the same editor. That's what happens, I guess. After a period of time, you think about things that can improve it. So that's what they did here, and that's why we have a copy of the matan in full. That's thanks to the editor, who, although it doesn't seem like any of the manuscripts had a copy of the matan alone before the sharh, he actually did that just to make it easier, for reference purposes, and anybody who wants to kind of do anything with the matan thereafter, memorize it, learn it, make their own notes on it, whatever it might be, then that's quite facilitative. So alhamdulillah, that's why we have access to the matan now. Otherwise, it would have been a bit of a mission, really, to try to do that. So alhamdulillah, like I said, each point has like 50 pages of commentary, and it's quite extensive. Of course, not literally, but you get the point. There's a lot of details, and it's on the manhaj, as it were, of the Rasa'i'l Readings, which means that I'm not necessarily. I mean, this could potentially be done as an entire course, right? It could be done over multi-week kind of course, where we really spend some time with the masalas and really think about all of the varying possibilities and the like. So if you've come to ask every single question you've ever had about fasting in your life, then you might have to attend another class after this to get all of your questions answered, because this is not the function of this dars, although it is meant to be a recap, and it does comprise important central foundational masalas in Kitab al-Sawm, according to the great Hanafi primers like the Waqaya and the Kanz, as I mentioned. So it's an excellent presentation of those masalas. But the way to really understand this topic and any topic generally is to depart from one's ideas. So if you already think you figured everything out and you're just here to kind of just check, then this is not necessarily the right way, because that doesn't necessarily allow for you to kind of really consider each masala. And unfortunately, we might not necessarily have time, as I mentioned, to get through all of the masalas with that kind of detail. So we will be moving with a little bit of speed, just because we want to try to get through this in a reasonable amount of time as well. And it's an opportunity generally to review, but I want us to kind of do this review with that clarity of mind, right? So do the review with clarity of mind rather than simply doing a ta'qid and affirming what you have done previously. You might find that that is beneficial. Also, I don't want to get into I don't want to kind of get into all of these topics of, somebody's auntie is diabetic, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for afia for her, and somebody else has a problem, they have a personal problem, and you have a kaffarah issue, and your dog saw the moon, or whatever it might be. Like, this is not the time for it, right? So we are just trying to focus on usul madhab. Don't tell me what about the latest hospital procedures are, or the latest fatwa that you have read, or what your local imam has said. None of that is important right now. It's you have to make your mind up about how you want to learn the deen, how you want to learn about the sharia, and what exactly you are seeking from a class like this. But that's why I'm saying it's on the wavelength of the other sessions that we've had. So although I appreciate that it might be a bit more interesting to people because Ramadan is around the corner, but kind of keep in mind that it might not again be the final tahqiq of every single issue because we're reading a matn, right? So there might be other tahqiqat, other issues that might not be so often. But I'm just saying that it's not like a one-time reading where you'll resolve everything. Rather, this comes with study. So just like I've said in all of the other sessions that we've had, this shouldn't be your only um, entry point, as it were, to the fiqh of fasting or fiqh generally speaking. Rather, this should be secondary, right? So it's secondary in the sense that it complements your primary studies, right? So that's the function. Otherwise, anybody who makes the basis of their ilm intensives, right? Intensive reading of this, intensive reading of that, they won't understand anything because ilm takes time, and you need sabr. And anybody who's in a rush, they will never attain unto this because ilm manifests in the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills it to manifest in your heart, not in the time that you wish for it to manifest. So it might be that you hear something today and it doesn't correspond to what you have heard before. But maybe don't just be quick to object. That maybe think about it a second time, a third time, maybe sleep on it a night or two, a month or two, a year or two, and then maybe you will find more clarity. But that's only if you keep up with it. Of course, even beyond this, as has always been the case, I mean, there's always opportunity to kind of to have further discussions or to ask any questions or anything like that, and that's what the group is for. That's we have the group, and it's obviously something which can be used as well. So, without further ado, let us begin. And as I've mentioned about the questions, I'll emphasize once again that there's no ill intent meant thereby. You're important, your questions are important. I'm the bad guy. It's inshallah, you'll have an opportunity for those questions to be answered. So I don't want anybody to kind of take anything the wrong way if your question isn't answered or something like that. But the first wajib of the talib al-ilm and in the dars is istima'. Right? The first wajib is to listen. It's not to be hasty in asking questions. Something doesn't make sense. By all means, write it down, think about it. Maybe after a line or two, it will make sense. Right? But if you find that it's still not making sense, then maybe that's an opportunity to ask a question. But don't be hasty in these things. Let me just quickly ask a question. Like your question is like really, really important. No, this is from al-ajalatu min ash-shaytan. Right? The mu'min has the anni. Right? At-ta'anni min ar-Rahman is circumspect. Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Of course, in the actual text of the Mظهر الأنوار, he has like his introduction and everything, and the matn is kind of subsumed within the sharh, so it's one book. So that's why over here it just goes straight into it, because he has extracted this now from the larger work itself. That's why there's no introduction or anything here. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. فقال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا به وبكم آمين. He says فصل في ماهية الصوم. He says هو ترك الأكل والشرب والجماع من الصبح إلى المغرب من أهله مع النية. So the first section now is on the essence of the Sawm. So definition of fasting. So he says it is to leave eating and drinking and sexual intercourse from Fajr until Maghrib. He says من أهله مع النية. From somebody who has the legal capacity to fast, and he says with an intention. So we'll see some of these details further, but the thing to take away here is that it's not eating and drinking needn't necessarily be food and drink, can be anything whatsoever. This also, although it's not necessarily clear from this definition, what's also understood is that anything which reaches the body cavity through the recognized openings on the body, whether they are natural or unnatural, either natural openings like your mouth or your nose, right, or the anus or something like that, and it reaches inside the body cavity, this also is going to invalidate your fast. And then he says, well, jima', and then intercourse, as it is normally understood. The male private organ entering into the vagina or the anus, right, of another human being. And min ahlihi, of course, the other thing would be just ejaculation alone with a physical stimulant. That will also invalidate. So I'm just kind of explaining out some of these ideas. He's given us a definition now, but just for clarity's sake, so you recognize that it's not just eating something or drinking something or engaging in sexual intimacy which leads to the invalidation of the fast. Rather, it's actually more than that. And there's actually something else as well, which is the idea of vomiting and that also invalidates. But of course, there's only so much that you can put into a definition. But that's also why ulama would object sometimes to definitions, provide alternative definitions which they would deem to be superior. But like I said, he's kind of going, he's going based off the books which are already there in the tradition. He's not necessarily trying to do a tahqiq of that, because all of the other details will now manifest in his sharh. So he says, min ahlihi, so somebody who has the legal capacity to fast. So not everybody has the legal capacity to fast, but really we're looking for somebody who is going to be fulfilling the conditions of validity. So there are different types of conditions, shurut, for example, of wujub. You have the shurut al-wujub, you have shurut wujub al-ada. The shurut al-wujub are the conditions for the obligation of the fast, and the shurut wujub al-ada are the obligations of fulfillment, i.e. the conditions which require you to actually fast that day. So for example, if somebody is so an example of that would be residency. So if an individual is a traveler, then they are not obliged to fast that day. And then you have shurutu sihha, so the conditions of validity, like the fact that a person is a Muslim. So somebody who's not a Muslim, his fast would not be valid. Similarly, the individual needs to be free from menstruation or lokia. So if a lady is menstruating or she's in a state of lokia, postnatal bleeding, then her fast is not going to be valid. Ma'niyati, so you have to have an intention, because tark in and of itself, i.e. simply not doing certain things, this is not considered to be an act. Rather, it's only considered to be an act when you can join it to an intention, when tark is done deliberately. So that's why he adds the idea of the niyyah over here, and the niyyah, as you are all aware, we'll see it now in the next section, but it's the qasd, it's the direction, that the heart's direction towards a certain act, right? So a qasd al-fi'l. So he says فصل في النية. So section on intentions. وصح صوم رمضان أداء والنفل والنذر المعين بنية من الليل. So he says the fast of the month of Ramadan, the current performance, and also a voluntary fast, and also a specified vow. A specified vow. So a vow is simply when a person makes that utters words by which they make the fasting binding upon themselves. So somebody says, for example, I vow to fast on Saturday, or I vow to fast 3 days, or something like that. Or they specify it, Saturday, the 13th of July, 2027. So if they say something like that, then it becomes a specified vow, i.e. that it's occurring on a specific date. So he says for these types of fasts, it's acceptable for the intention to occur from the night. So he doesn't go into further details at this point, but the permission to make an intention would extend until the midpoint, i.e. the middle of the fasting day. So middle of the fasting day is the midpoint between Fajr and Maghrib. So midpoint between Fajr and Maghrib. So this is where it basically extends until the night begins at Maghrib. So it's the night before. So as soon as Maghrib time hits, it's legitimate now to have an intention. Now, under normal circumstances, if you consider all of the other ibadat, what we are looking for is a niyyah muqarina. A niyyah muqarina lil fi'l. The niyyah has to occur immediately prior to the, or in concurrently to the initiation of the act. So we see that in zakat, for example. We see that in fasting. We see that in entering into a state of ihram. We see that everywhere. So fasting here is technically should be the same. So you should make an intention at the moment of initiating the fast. But because that's quite difficult, they actually allowed for you to make an intention much earlier. So if you make an intention, again with the prayer, what happens? If you nullify your intention, your subsequent prayer would not be valid. But here that doesn't apply. Right? So here that doesn't apply. So you make an intention, it's not nullified by anything else other than actually nullifying that intention by negating it. So this now extends, as we've been talking about, up until the midday point. So that's why somebody wakes up, for example, 10 o'clock in the morning. Let's say the middle of the day is 11:30, and it's a random Tuesday. They realize they don't have their morning Weetabix. They've run out of coffee, whatever it might be. So they decide, okay, I'm going to do something for Allah. I'm going to fast. So it's this intention at this point is deemed valid as long as you have not done anything which would otherwise invalidate the fast between Fajr time and this point. He says, وَبِنِيَّةِ مُطْلَقِهِ. So if you printed this off, then you should correct that. Or if you're writing it down, you should correct it because the meme is missing here. بِنِيَّةِ مُطْلَقِهِ. This means with a generic intention to fast. So because the month of Ramadan is pre-specified by the lawgiver, and the vow is also specified by the individual themselves, and every day has the capacity to be a fasting day, that's as it would relate now to the nafil fast. In all of these cases, if you made a generic fast, because intention. So there's two parts to the intention: the asl of the niyyah and the wasf of the niyyah. Asl of the niyyah is to fast, and the wasf of it is to specify what type of fast it is. That applies to all of the ibadat. You're always doing that anyway. You're intending to pray, then pray what? Maghrib, Isha, Asr, Witr, right? So you always have the asl wasf manifesting. So that's why he's mutlaqihi, i.e. bi asl niyyah. You just the intention to fast. He says, wa bi niyyati nafil. So if that's just intention to fast, now bi niyyati nafil. If you intend fasting a nafil fast, it's a random Monday, you decided to fast, it's Monday tomorrow, I think I'll fast. But you're kind of oblivious to the to the world, and you didn't realize it was actually the first of Ramadan. So it turns out you wake up in the morning, and your siblings, your friends, your parents, somebody's kind of, Ramadan Mubarak messages are kind of coming in. Your phone was on whatever airplane mode or something, so you weren't really thinking about anything. You're oblivious to the world. At this point, it would count as a Ramadan fast. Why? Because the day is already specified. All you have to do is match in terms of the base specification, i.e. at the base level of fasting. It says, وَمَا بَقِيَ لَمْ يَجُزْ إِلَّا بِنِيَّةٍ مُبَيِّتَةٍ مُبَيِّتَةٍ. I'm actually doubting now whether maybe something has been missed here. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's been missed, so that's fine. So he says what remains, i.e. any other type of fast, you have to ensure that you have specified it from the night before. So you have until from between Maghrib and Fajr to make a specific intention for that fast. So that would apply, for example, to the expiatory fast, to any other type of fast which is due, or to a makeup fast, and so on. So you have to ensure But as Fajr time hits, you have a clear intention of what you intend to fast for that particular day, but that does not apply to the nafil fast, nor does it apply to that which has been specified either by the lawgiver or by the individual mukallaf themselves. Okay, that's the niyyah. Then he says, فصل في رؤية الهلال. So section on witnessing the crescent. So witnessing the crescent, this is one of those masail which is connected, like other masalas, to the ru'ya حقيقية. So it's رؤية حقيقية أي بصرية. رؤية البصر. Right? So it's what we're looking for is not simply that you see the crescent. It's not about that you see the crescent. It's about seeing it with your naked eye. And there are many mas'alas like this across the fiqh. This is not the only mas'ala. There are numerous mas'alas in the fiqh where the requirement is to see with your naked eye, and not just a picture, for example, or some other type of representation, whether it be digital or instrumental or anything like that. So this is the رؤية الهلال. So he says, ويصام رمضان برؤية هلاله. So Ramadan is to be fasted once its crescent has been sighted. أو بعد شعبان 30. Or after 30 days of Sha'ban have passed. فإن كان بالسماء علة ورأى عدل واحد هلال رمضان وشهد عند القاضي تقبل شهادته ولو قنا أو امرأة أو محدودا في قذف تائبا. So how is the month of Ramadan established? It's established either by citing the crescent of the month of Ramadan, i.e. after 29 days have passed, the crescent of the month of Ramadan is cited. Or there's some type of, so it's overcast, or there's something which is preventing, could be smoke or something else, could be fog, it could be weather conditions, or it could be something else, which prevents them from being able to sight the crescent now. In that case, you would simply wait until 30 days have passed. So he says, if there is some type of obstruction now in the sky, this is now a khabar dini. So what's also when it comes to affirming that the month of Ramadan has begun, then all we're looking for is a khabar of an adal. So the adal is an upright individual. So the reports of upright individuals with respect to diniyat are considered to be acceptable, i.e. just normative religious reports. This is the direction of the Qibla. This place here is filthy or it is pure. The mosque is round the corner. That's not that significant, I guess. But and the month of Ramadan has begun, or for example, the prayer time has begun. So these are all religious reports. So what is required for these types of religious reports? It is only an adal, right? So an adal alone suffices. So we accept this in the case that there's an obstruction in the sky. So we already talked about obstructions. Who is the adal? The adal now is somebody who fulfills the fara'id, and they avoid the kaba'ir, and their good deeds are greater than their bad deeds. No such thing as somebody who is perfect. So they're not looking for perfection, right? There's nobody who is ma'soom except the Anbiya alayhim salatu wassalam. So all they're looking for is somebody who is genuinely upright, as far as we can tell. So if their good deeds are greater number than their bad deeds, then they're considered to be adal. So this is the adl now. So if he sees it, what does he do? He proceeds to inform the qadi. So he says, وَشَهِدَ عِنْدَ الْقَاضِي. So he testifies before the judge. I informs the judge of what he has seen. تُقْبَلْ شَهَادَتُهُ. The qadi would accept his report. Given that he's an adl, he's an upright individual, the qadi would accept his report. He says, وَلَوْ قِنًّا. Even if he is an abd. أو امرأة. Even if it's a lady. أو محدودا في قذف تائبا. Or if it is somebody who has repented, but he's also been subject to the had of qadf. So he's made a false accusation of zina against somebody. He has received the had for that, and he is repentant, and he's. But now, what? Unfortunately, he is afflicted by this fisq for the rest of his life, i.e., this hala or this state. But in terms of his basic report, this is considered to be acceptable, given that he has repented. And similarly, a lady, why is he saying these types of things? Because some of these people, from what we know from Abwab or Kitab al-Shahadat, their shahada, their testimony is not always accepted alone. Right? So, for example, the qin, and then he doesn't really have any wilaya over himself. He doesn't have a legal authority over himself. A lady, for example, it depends on the type of report, but for general mu'amalat and the like, 2 women are required. So anyway, he explicitly mentions these individuals. He says, وَفِي الْفِطْرِ لَا تُقْبَلُ إِلَّا شَهَادَةُ رَجُلَيْنِ أَوْ رَجُلٍ وَامْرَأَتَيْنِ ويشترط العدالة والحرية ولفظ الشهادة للدعوة. So he says, what about Eid al-Fitr? Eid al-Fitr, now, this has been حقوق العباد. Whereas the entry of the month of Ramadan was from the akhbar ad-diniya, that it was a religious report. There is this over here, Fitr resembles more like a haqq of an abd, the right of a servant. And as such, it takes the ahkam of the rights of the ibad, which is that what's required, 2 male witnesses, or 1 man and 2 females, and they have to be upright, they have to be free, and they have to utter the words ashhad. Right? They have to utter the words ashhad, i.e. testify before the qadi. And it's only when they do that that their report would be considered acceptable. Because it's not really a report now, it's more like a shahada, it's a testimony. And the reason why it resembles the haqq of the ibad is because there's some type of ilzam to make a payment. What is the payment? Sadaqat al-fitr. Right? Sadaqat al-fitr is the payment which is going to be due upon them. So from this perspective, that's when it ends up resembling. And then there is the question of the da'wah. So does there also need to be some type of da'wah? Which means does there have to be a claim which is being made, and then there's some sense of Ramadan, or sorry, the Eid al-Fitr and Shawwal being established secondarily through the dictates of this claim. So there's actually multiple riwayats on it. So he's saying the soundest position on it is that no da'wah is required. So for an example of a da'wah would be something like somebody says to another person that that a certain money, that if the month of Ramadan ends, then a certain amount of money is due to him, right? And then the other party, for example, would deny that the month has ended, and then he would bring witnesses to show that the month has ended. So this is how it would work with the da'wah. So what happens? It proves that the money is due because the month of Ramadan has ended, but also secondarily that Eid al-Fitr is the following day because the crescent has been sighted. So this is all in the case that there is some type of obstruction in the sky. So he says, وَبِلَا عِلَّةٍ شُرِطَ جَمْعٌ عَظِيمٌ فِيهِمَا. If there's no obstruction in the sky, then Abu Hanifa according to his general asl, he considers this to be a qadih, that there's an issue with just one or two people. If this is like this is umum al-balwa, something that everybody is afflicted by. It doesn't make sense for a few people, a handful of people, I'm just using a handful by way of example to talk about the issue of umum balwa, for a few people to be aware of this and nobody else to know it's Eid. He said this doesn't make sense, right? So under normal circumstances, according to this qaida of umum balwa, so that's basically what Abu Hanifa applies over here. So he says inconceivable that that the skies are clear, that there's no obstruction whatsoever, and there's only a couple of people who saw the crescent. Rather, they are mistaken, right? They're mistaken. So he says, "Wal-adha kal-fitri," and Eid al-Adha is like Eid al-Fitr in the same way. How so? Because it resembles the haqq of the ibad. How does it resemble the haqq of the ibad? Remember, there's some type of monetary payment which is now due, which is the udhiyah. Right? Of course, some of the mutaakhireen, they talk about how, given that people aren't necessarily trying to sight the moon anymore, the crescent, then it is reasonable for us to allow for two witnesses, as it were. And as long as they come forward, then it would be acceptable. But anyway, that's not the asl madhab, but that's a later fatwa. He says, وَمَنْ رَأَى هِلَالَ رَمَضَانَ أَوْ الْفِطْرِ وَحْدَهُ. So whoever sees now the crescent of Ramadan or Eid al-Fitr alone, وَرُدَّ قَوْلُهُ, and his statement is rejected. Sama, he is to fast. So just because your statement is rejected, the shuhud al-shahr, like it doesn't negate the reality which you experienced, because the deen is more than what the qadi says, because you have the akhbar or the ahkam al-qada'iyya and the ahkam al-diyana. So the ahkam al-diyana are your personal duties and your personal obligations, which are sometimes outside the remit of the qadi. So that's why even if the qadi turns around now and says that I'm not accepting your statement, he still, with respect to himself, has yaqeen that he's seen the moon. So he's still going to fast, right? So he'll still be obliged to fast at this time. So he's saying, وَإِنْ أَفْطَرَ قَضَى فَقَطْ. But if he does end up omitting the fast or breaking the fast, he says قَضَى فَقَطْ, that he would only need to perform a qada. So of course, in the case that he omitted it altogether, there's no reason for there to be a qada, because there's no reason for there to be a kaffarah, an expiation, because expiations only manifest through the hetk of the hurmat of the month of Ramadan. So it's only by rendering or by ruining the sanctity of the month. So if you don't even fast, then no kaffarah is ever going to be due. So the kaffarat, as we'll see later, only due in the case that somebody fasts and then they ruin the sanctity of that month by breaking the fast. So that, of course, it ruins their fast, but secondarily, because it's in the month of Ramadan, then there is a secondary consequence to that, which is the kaffarah. But given that the qadi rejected his testimony, there's now a shubha, there's now a legal doubt which manifests with respect to the establishment of the month of Ramadan. And that's why we didn't affirm the kaffarah for him. He says, وَبِعَدِّ صَوْمِ ثَلَاثِينَ بِقَوْلِ عَدْلَيْنِ حَلَّ الْفِطْرُ. He says, and excuse me, so he says that by the count of 30 days, he says, by the testimony of two upright witnesses, he says it's permissible to break the fast. But if it's one upright individual, then it's not actually permissible for them to break the fast in that case. So this would be at the end of the month, so with respect to fitr. And finally, he says, وَلَا عِبْرَةَ لِاخْتِلَافِ الْمَطَالِعِ. And there's no consideration which is given to differing horizons. Differing horizons being, for example, the where the sun, for example, it rises and sets at different times. So so if that's different, so if it's only a few minutes, that's basically the same place. And there's some measurements that they do provide to give a sense of it. But really, the point is that if the crescent is sighted, then everybody is obliged to fast. Right? So everybody is obliged to fast. And this is in light of the nas صوموا لرؤيته. So if the crescent is sighted anywhere, then it becomes binding upon everybody else to fast. So this is certainly excuse me. So this is certainly a significant point. So they aren't paying attention to differing horizons in different places. So rather, as soon as it's cited, of course, there's a different issue now with respect to whether the khabar, the news of that sighting, is reaching a certain place with certainty or otherwise. That's a separate masala altogether. But it's more about the concept itself stands, and there's some disagreement in the madhab about this as well. It's not the only position which is there, but it's certainly in many of the mutun. You can see this is quite a this is the transmitted position. Okay, so this is the discussion on citing the crescent, and then he has one masala, which is the masala of Yawm al-Shak. What did, sorry, Danielle says, what did this line mean, counting and just individual, that the counting is only taken from someone who has adala? بيعدي صوم 30, this one? Is that what you're talking about? So, so it's about the month of Ramadan being established by two upright witnesses, and then 30 days passing. So he says that is it acceptable now for them to celebrate Eid on day 31, right, the day after, once 30 days have passed. So he says if it was established by these adlain, then yes, and if it was established by an adl, then no, i.e. one person, then no. So at that point, it's just to kind of ward off a shubha, which means that they would expect that the person fasts, or that the community fasts the 31st day as well, and then just to be sure, and then they'll celebrate Eid. فصل في مسائل الشك ولا يصام يوم الشك إلا تطوعا. Okay, so what is يوم الشك? يوم الشك now is the day after the 29th of Sha'ban, and the sky is overcast. Right, the sky is overcast, so they didn't sight the moon. Right, so they didn't sight the moon. So this is now Yom Shak. There's a doubt. Could have been the month of Ramadan, but the sky was overcast. There's a couple of other descriptions of what it means for something to be Yom Shak, for the day to be Yom Shak, as well, like the fact that people are talking about a sighting. Maybe it wasn't established. Maybe the Qadi rejected it, and so on. So he says that you are not to fast on this day, the day of doubt, except as a voluntary fast. So we already learned earlier that the month of Ramadan would be, i.e., the fasting of the month of Ramadan would be valid if you have a generic intention to fast, or even if you intended a nafil fast. So that's what he is expressing over here. But he's also there's also a problem in that many people might try to do some type of joint intention. If it's the month of Ramadan, then I'm intending Ramadan. And if it's not the month of Ramadan, then I'm intending Qada from last year. Or I'm intending a nafil fast, or I'm intending something else. So all of these types of intentions are all makruh. And there's a problem with all of them. And this is why they discouraged anybody from having such an intention. Rather, you would only fast, legitimately, on this day if you can make a clear intention to simply fast as a voluntary fast. And that's why, in the normal circumstances, the Qadi will simply advise that people abstain from food and drink and that which invalidates the fast in the morning time until about the half the day has passed, and then he will just tell everybody you can break your fast now, but he's going to carry on fasting, right? So he's secretly going to carry on fasting himself, and that's also, it shows you something, gives you something of an insight into the fiqh of the khawas versus the fiqh of the awam, that not all of the mas'alas are for every single individual. Rather, there are mas'alas for people at different levels, right? So it depends on what level you're at, and that dictates what kind of mas'ala is going to be applicable to you. So that's also a reason why not everything which is studied in the classroom is supposed to be transmitted on the streets, quote unquote, or social media or anywhere else. Rather, there's an adab when it comes to ilm. فصل فيما يوجب القضاء والكفارة. How do these kinds of intentions differ from the conditional intention? Which kinds of intentions? If it's Ramadan, then I will fast, versus if I wake up, I will fast. So if I wake up, I will fast is not an intention. So because it's you're making it condition, like you're making your intention conditional upon waking up. So it's only if you wake up and then make an intention to fast, then your intention would be deemed legitimate. Here, the person has a clear intention to fast, but it's this or that. That's the difference. Um, I'm not sure I understand that question. So he says فصل فيما يوجب القضاء والكفارة. So he says إن أكل الصائم أو شرب غذاء أو دواء أو جمع في أحد السبيلين عمدا قضى وكفر كالمظاهر. Okay, so that which was the section on that, which necessitates the qada, the makeup, and the expiation. So he says, if the fasting person now eats something or drinks something which is of nutritional value or medicinal benefit, or he engages in intercourse, or the individual is the recipient of intercourse, so the person either the doer or the done to. So that's why jumia here applies as well. The ahad sabilaini, in one of the two passageways, a front or rear. Amdan, deliberately, then a qada would be due and a kafara would also be due, like the mudahir, because the kafara is the kafaratul zihar. So that's why he's talking about in the case that the individual says something like anti alayka dhahri ummi, that he says something like that, it makes his wife impermissible for him by likening her to his mother's back, i.e. an impermissible part of his mother's body or his mahram's body, then the expiation becomes due as a result of that, which is to free a slave. In the absence of a slave, then let me see if he's sorry, it's coming up. So inshallah we'll see the kafara a bit later on. So this is important now, that the only time the kafara would be due is when there is a complete fulfillment of the shahwatay al-farj wal-batan. So either farj or al-batan. So either complete fulfillment of the shahwat al-farj, right, of the desire of the private part, the private organ, which means actual sexual intercourse. That's what's required for the kafara to be due in addition to the qada. Or the eating or drinking of something of nutritional value or medicinal benefit. So if it doesn't have either of those conditions, or it's not of nutritional or medicinal benefit, or it doesn't enter through those parts, like for example, like it's a nose spray or something else, then this would invalidate the fast, but no kafara would be due. Right? So the mafhum, i.e. these implications which are there, these counter implications, these are always mu'tabara. This is why they say mafahim al-kutub hujja. Right? Mafahim al-kutub hujja. Tasting food, is this nutritional benefit? No, because nutritional benefit would only be realized if it reaches the inner body cavity. right? So tasting itself is not considered to be nutritional benefit, unless of course somebody swallows it. That's why he'll say later that tasting something is makruh. فصل فيما يوجب القضاء دون الكفارة. So a section now on that which necessitates the qada, but not the kafara. He says, وَإِنْ أَفْطَرَ خَطَأً أو مكرها. So what are we looking for? We're looking for somebody who doesn't do any of these, the two things that he mentioned, deliberately, i.e., the consuming of something of nutritional and medicinal benefit, or engaging in sexual intercourse deliberately, or we are looking for some type of excuse, or we are looking for the ma'na of these things, i.e., the nutritional benefit manifesting, but not directly, because directly would be through the mouth. So if there's nutritional and medicinal benefit which manifests from somewhere else on the body, through the anus, through the nose, through something else, then this would also invalidate. So these are the kinds of things that we're looking for here. What if a person ate medicine for health reasons? This wouldn't necessitate the kafara. We'll see. It's actually he's going to have the awarid al-mubiha, which is coming up. But if you had like a legitimate health reason to consume something, to take some medicine or the like, then no kafara would be due in that case. But he would have to do a qada. So he says, if he invalidates his fast mistakenly. So a khata is when it's done non-deliberately. Accident. It's an accident, right? That's what we're talking about. It's an accident. So and this is separate to a different idea that we'll see later, which is doing something forgetfully. So forgetfulness and doing something accidentally are two different ahwal, or two different states. Because here he might so it could be that something happens and it was out of his control, or he deliberately tries to invalidate his fast, but he thought he had a legitimate reason for it. And so that's two ways accidents can manifest. So either something just happened, accidentally coughed whilst he was, rinsing out his mouth in wudu, and he took some water in. So this would be an accident. No kafara would be due for this. He says, "Al mukrahan," oh, he's coerced into it. Somebody puts a gun to his head and tells him to drink something. Again, no kafara is due. Or ihtaqana, or there is the hukna, when somebody takes medicine in through the rear to the extent of a suppository, which is probably the extent of a couple of centimeters to an inch, that extent. Or ista'ata, or they take in medication through or something through the nose, through the nasal cavity. So it also breaks the fast. أو أقطر في أذنه, or he drops medication, for example, into his ear. أو داوى جائفة أو آمة فوصل إلى جوفه أو دماغه. He says, so those are all natural openings, manafith, excuse me, on the body. Remember, we're looking at all of the openings on the body. So he mentioned the anus, he mentioned the nasal cavity, he mentioned the anus, nose, ear. Then he says, what about if you have a what about if you have an abdominal injury or a head injury? So it's the ja'ifa or the amma. So he says if it reaches the internal body cavity, he says, or it reaches the brain itself, then again it would break the fast. So if it's just on the outside, for example, then this is of no consequence, because what we're looking for is for something to go all the way in. So similarly, if somebody applies some, maybe they have a sore nose or something, so apply some cream there, or on the edge of their ear, or something like that. Of course, that doesn't invalidate anything because you're not inside. It's only when the medication reaches inside that's when it becomes a problem. He says, أو ابتلع حصاة أو حديدا, or he swallows a stone or a piece of iron, أو أكل ما بين, and that's not food. That's why it has it's not of nutritional value. أو أكل ما بين أسنانه مثل حمصة, or he consumes something which is like a حمصة, the size of a chickpea. So it's something which is stuck within his teeth, and he swallows that. No kaffarah is due. أو قاء ملء فيه, or he vomits a mouthful. فأعاد منه شيئا, so he deliberately takes something in. This would invalidate the fast, even if it's only a little bit that he deliberately takes in. أو استقاء ملء فيه, or he induces vomit and it's a mouthful. So either it's spontaneous and he takes some in, even if it's only a little. So we're not talking about reflex, right? So if it kind of reflexively goes back, that's of no consideration. We're talking about somebody who deliberately kind of just swallows something now. He says, أو جمعت نائمة أو مجنونة. So a lady is second. So if she's asleep here, that's fine. But the other case is مجنونة. Yeah. So he actually gives here in the sharh the answer to this. So he says, so what happened? She was sane, and then she intended to fast, and then she became insane in the day. So he says, and then a man engaged in intercourse with her. So he says, so the junoon which occurred would not negate her fast. But the fact that somebody engaged in intercourse with her, this is a mufsid, right? This is so. This is how the Majnuna case works. He says, "أو أفسده من غير نية," or he didn't have an intention and he invalidated his fast. أو نوى بعد الصبح ثم أفسد, or he made an intention after Fajr time, so not in the night, ثم أفسد, and then he invalidated his fast. أو أمسك في رمضان كله ولم ينوي صوما ولا فطرا, or he simply did not fast, أمسك في رمضان, that he abstained from the invalidators in the month of Ramadan, but he did not intend fasting. So again, Qada would be due, but no kaffarah. Excuse me. أو جامع بهيمة, or he engaged in intercourse with an animal. He says, أو ميتة, or a deceased woman, أو في غير فرج, or in other than the vagina. He says, أو قبل أو لمس, or he kissed a lady, أو لمس, or he touched, kissed somebody, or he touched them, فأنزل, and then he ejaculated, قضى فقط. So in all of these cases, only a qada is due, right? So of course, sometimes people object to the kinds of things that fuqaha are saying. There's not a manual of ethics. It's obviously haram and from the kaba'ir. That's not the discussion right now. The discussion right now is ensuring that you have understood the principle, and that's what's being expressed. That's why they mention these types of things. It's obvious that these things are utterly horrendous and they are categorically haram. But that's not what they're trying to do right now. There's a place to kind of discuss those issues, and it's not right now, because right now we're talking about the qawaid of that which invalidates the fast. So he says, "O fi ghayri farjin." So in all of these cases, that's what we talked about. If there is the ma'na of sexual benefit, which is what? Ejaculation. So if you have ejaculation, but not ejaculation alone, ejaculation which is accompanied by some type of physical stimulant, and that's why he had to touch here, or he had to kiss, or he had to. It was fi ghayri farjin, so it was somewhere else on the body. For example, he ejaculated, engaging in intimacy with this individual, or it was something else altogether, which means that it's not actually intercourse. Then it is some form of masturbation, right? So that's what he is expressing. What did he mean by أفسد من غير نية أو نوى بعد الصبح ثم أفسد؟ أفسده أو نوى بعد الصبح ثم أفسد. So, نوى بعد الصبح is that he, after Fajr, he made an intention to fast, and then he deliberately, and then he invalidated his fast. So أفسده من غير نية. Yeah, it just as I mentioned that he didn't have an intention. He didn't have an intention to fast. So this is covering like all the bases really. Okay. Then he says فصل فيما لا يفسد أو فيما لا يفسد به الصوم. Question: when the mu'allif says that it won't require kaffarah if one made the niyyah after Fajr, does this only apply to those fasts which must be intended the night before? What if somebody made a niyyah to do a Ramadan fast before Dhahwatul Kubra but after Fajr, and then ate food, which ruling would this fall under? That's what he's talking about. So what you've described now, this scenario, that's what he's talking about. So somebody made an intention to fast the month of Ramadan, 10 o'clock in the morning. They didn't make an intention before. They took sleeping pills. They missed Fajr and everything. They woke up, 9 o'clock in the morning. Now it's still, for example, a couple of hours before the middle of the fasting day. So they make an intention. They didn't make an intention beforehand as well. Maybe they slept through the entire night. They missed Maghrib, Isha, and Fajr, right? So now they didn't have an opportunity prior to this to make an intention. If they make an intention at this time, and then they were to invalidate the fast, then no kafara would be due. Okay, so he says no kafara. What? Didn't I say that? said no kaffarah would be due. But Ramadan fast, what does that mean? Deliberate eating after intention. Yeah, but this is shubha. It's coming. It's coming up. He's going to talk more about it in the next section or in the coming section. So he says, فصل فيما لا يفسد به الصوم. All right, okay. Yeah, so it's coming. It's not just about making intention and deliberately invalidating the fast. So that's not how this works. It's much more nuanced than that. So that's why all of these masalas are mentioned like that. He says, وَلَا أَفْطَرَ نَاسِيًا. So he forgetfully invalidated, broke his fast. أو نام فاحتلم. Went to sleep, had a wet dream. أو نظر فأنزل. Or he looked at something, looked at the opposite gender, whatever it might be, and then he ejaculated. أو احتجم. Or underwent cupping. أو ادهن. Or he applied oil to himself. أو اكتحل. Or applied كحل, antimony, to his eyes. أو اغتاب. Or he engaged in backbiting, right? And this is slander. It's not like literally went and bit somebody's back. He says, "Oh, غلبه القيء," or he was overcome with, i.e., vomit. So it just kind of spontaneously occurred. أو تقيأ قليلا, or yeah, or he deliberately vomited, but only a little. Because it need to be a mouthful for it to invalidate the fast. أو أصبح جنبا, or Fajr time hits and he's in a state of major ritual impurity, i.e., he requires the ghusl. أو صب في إحلينه دهن, or there is some type of oil which is poured into his urethra, or kind of yeah, I guess for medication or something, perhaps some ancient kind of medicine or something. So this is probably the only interesting point, which is that of all of the openings on the body, this is the only one where it does not invalidate the fast if something were to enter. So the urethra, and the reason for that is because it's blocked, so it's not possible. So I guess medically speaking, it's like a flap. So so this is why Abu Hanifa actually differed with Abu Yusuf on it. So it was, and the ulama explain that actually this point returns to just human biology, right? So can it pass all the way through? Like, is it completely open such that you can get to the bladder, or is it blocked off? So if it's blocked off, then if you were to put something inside, it's actually of no consequence. So that's why over here he says that where you put oil inside the urethra itself, it doesn't actually reach the body cavity because it blocked off. So it's as if, for example, if you consider um, uh, somebody were to put some oil inside their belly button. So what happens? It's blocked off from the edge unless you have like an injury, an opening or something. That's like an exception. But the point is blocked off from the other side. So that means that this is not inside the body, right? So it's not just about something that looks like being inside. Rather, it's about having the hukam and the ruling of being on the inside. So that's not realized here. He said, "أو في أذنه ماء," or he were to put water into his ears. Um, second. Second. Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to check that because it just threw me off a little bit because he says here صب في أذنه ماء, and so this is correct, but of course it's an issue of khilaf. So some of the ulama said yes because it returns to the ta'lil now. It returns to the ta'lil. So that's why he's chosen the position, perhaps of Sahib al-Hidayah and others, who said that it doesn't because it returns to what's it, Sahib al-Hidayah? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Sahib al-Hidayah and others who affirm that it returns to it being something of benefit. So given that this is harmful, then it is not something which invalidates the fast. So that's what he's expressing over here. So he says أو دخل غبار أو دخان, so dust or smoke, أو ذباب حلقه, or fly enters into his throat, لم يفطر. So these are all excuses. So the point is that he can't really, if he's in a place where there is smoke and the like, then he can close his mouth, but it will necessarily enter through his nose, through his nasal cavities. And it's unavoidable. So this is why they said it doesn't break the fast. Okay, so let me take your questions now. Let's see. Is less than a mouthful excuse because it effectively does not come out with the force needed to leave the body, so it effectively stays within the body? Yeah, it doesn't have the hukm. It's just like wudu. So just like in wudu, we said it was filthy when it's a mouthful. So when it's less than that, then it doesn't have the hukm of it. So similarly over here, when it's not a mouthful, then it doesn't have the hukm of ifsad, and it's istihsan anyway. So it's against the qiyas because the normal qiyas dictates that your fast is only invalidated when something enters, not when something exits. Is a mouthful vomit mean swallowing a mouthful or just mouthful leaving the body? Um, it's just leaving the body. So it enters into your mouth. Then if you deliberately swallow it, then of course that was a problem, as we talked about before. But they're not kind of specified. Most people, of course, you can't necessarily do that. So it's only a theoretical kind of point. If the qiyas is maintained here, wouldn't this affect the issue of the ears? What does that mean? Is this talking about water just being in the ear versus being dripped into crevices such that it would go through the ears tubes and potentially go to one's throat, where the latter does not break the fast? No, it's not about reaching. It doesn't need to reach the throat. It needs to get, if it goes inside the ears, then it's reached the jawf, and that's it. It invalidates the fast at that point. They don't mention anything about it reaching the throat. Doesn't need to reach the throat. Remember we talked about this. Actually, maybe we didn't mention it yet, but there's the jawf, which is comprised of these two cavities. It's the head and the torso. So that's what we're looking at. So if it reaches the head of the torso, basically you've reached the jawf. So this is why they don't specify any further. That's why all of the nusus say that if it goes inside your ear, it breaks the fast. What are the cavities that are considered? Is it just the gut, stomach, brain, throat, or is it anything inside the body? Is it in this case would injection break the fast? So as we talked about, the jawf is basically the head and the torso. So an injection, I guess it might depend on where it's going. So if it's just like a vaccine or something, then if that's just going into your arm, then that's not really considered. But if something it's doing something else, and depending on the nature of what type of, might also depend on what type of injection it is. But we're looking for all of the natural or unnatural openings on the body. That's why he also talked about the abdominal injury or the head injury. So anything which is, and those are deliberate. He's deliberately saying abdominal, deliberately saying head, because he's not saying something in your leg, because we're looking for quote unquote space in the body. That's really what it's about. This is the nature of the idea of jawf. Jawf is some type of opening in the body, some type of space. So anywhere where we can find that, then that's when the hukum applies. So the underlying qiyas here is that anything that reaches the inner body cavity and creates some form of benefit would invalidate the fast. According to this point, according to what Sahib al-Hidayah said, yes, that it has it's of nutritional benefit, which is why Sahib al-Hidayah will say that if it is of medicinal benefit, then it breaks the fast. Okay, so في فصل فيما يكره في الصوم وما لا يكره وكره الذوق ومضغ شيء بلا عذر ومضغ العلك. So it's makruh now to taste something. Tasting means you have all the taste buds on your tongue. So it's to taste and then not to swallow thereafter. So it's not about putting something into your mouth. The issue is with it going down your throat, because with respect to that which is outside your mouth, the mouth is considered to be outside the body cavity. And with respect to that which is on the inside, then it's considered to be inside. So that's why, for example, swallowing saliva has no bearing on your fast, because it's inside. Now, of course, deliberately gathering it and swallowing it, that's makruh. But the point is that that if somebody experiences like more saliva or something like that, it's of no consequence. You don't have to do anything about it or spit it out or anything like that. It's also chewing something without any excuse might pertain to a lady who has like a child or something like that. So this would also be makruh unless you have an udhr, like a child, ومضغ العلك, and then chewing gum or the like, it kind of makes it look like you're not fasting. So this tuhma makes it's a bit suspicious. And رحم الله امرأ جب عن نفسه المغيبة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon the individual who wards ghiba and slander and the like away from himself. He says, وَالْقُبْلَةُ إِنْ لَمْ يَأْمَنْ, and then kissing if he doesn't have any fear. He doesn't fear that it will lead to anything more, because if he does have that fear, so that's why he says here, in lam ya'man. So in amina, then it's not makruh. Right? So in lam ya'man, that he fears that it might lead to something else, this is when it's makruh. He said, لا كحل ودهن شارب لو لا كحل ودهن شارب والسواك ولو عشيا. So he said, not applying kuhl. So now kuhl, what happens? So you also have the tear duct. And from the tear duct, some people might find that you experience, if you use eye drops or something, you might be able to taste it. So there is definitely a passageway, but that's not, this is equivalent to that which passes through the skin. So it's not like an opening, it's not manfadh, an opening to the inner body cavity, which is of consideration. So that's why this is not considered. So that's why the kuhl, the like, doesn't break the fast. Dehnu sharib, so again, applying oil to one's mustache or something. He says, and also brushing your teeth. He says, walau ashiyan, even if it's in the afternoon. Why? Because some of the other madhabs, like the Shafi'is, they consider that's not praiseworthy. In fact, it might be makruh. So it's not acceptable. But for us, it is fine all day. فصل فيما يكون شبهة في سقوط الكفارة وما لا يكون. So what is considered to be, so what constitutes a shubha and what does not, with respect to the kafara not being applicable. Let me see. What's a reasonable reason to allow someone to taste and not swallow? Would fear of making bad meal be enough, or if they fear anger from others, if they fail to make a good meal? Yeah, I mean, they talk about somebody who has an oppressive husband, for example, that will cause harm to them. They talk about it. Your meals are horrendous, and it's a month of Ramadan. You can't even cook properly, and you can't cook outside of Ramadan either. What's wrong with you? I don't know why I married you. He's going to say all of that to her. And then this is a terrible state for her to be in. So this is why they allowed for her to actually taste the food. So if you have a reasonable excuse, maybe somebody's job also might depend on it, if they're kind of like a restaurant worker or something like that. It's conceivable, but they would have to err on the side of caution, because it's easy for somebody to accidentally swallow something and ruin their fast. Is that brushing teeth with toothpaste? No, without. So without toothpaste. Toothpaste, I guess, is like a modern invention. Right, so the ancients would just kind of brush their teeth, and they would use like certain sticks and the like, which had kind of certain properties and vitamins and the like. Now, if you use a piece of plastic, it, it's not exactly good for you. So that's why we had to invent toothpaste to get all of that benefit. So yeah, so what they're talking about in the mutun and everything is merely the act of brushing. Okay, he says إذا أكل أو شرب. Brushing with taste coming into the mouth from paste is makruh, but doesn't invalidate the fast according to the point here. That's correct. But so it take the ruling of almost like tasting, but it's not something which should be done unless somebody has might be like really exceptional kind of circumstance. But the idea is that just brush without the toothpaste, for example. Unless you have particularly bad breath, and then you might need to visit the doctor or something. That's nothing to do with the month of Ramadan. You should risk your fast. You should just figure out why you have such bad breath. Um, yeah. But of course, naturally, a fasting person later in the day, then everybody has, there might be something, or you just brush your teeth in the morning times. You don't like before, like at suhoor time, that you brush your teeth then, so you don't need to use toothpaste later. But so under normal circumstances, you would still be brushing your teeth every time you perform the wudu. But you would omit like any toothpaste or the like. Okay. It says إذا أكل أو شرب أو جامع ناسيا. So if he eats something or drinks something or engages in sexual intercourse, he says forgetfully. Forgetfully means that he is not conscious of the fact that he is fasting. So not conscious of the fact that he's fasting. That's what forgetfulness means. فظن أن ذلك فطره. So then he thought that this has invalidated his fast. فأكل متعمدا. So he deliberately does something now which invalidates his fast. عليه القضاء دون الكفارة. Only a qada is due, no kafara is due. So this is a shubha. Right, so the shubha over here. It says ولا احتجم فظن أنه فطره فأكل متعمدا. So if he undergoes cupping now, and he thought that this invalidates his fast, so he deliberately ate something, فعليه القضاء والكفارة. He has to perform a qada and a kafara. He says إلا إذا أفتاه فقيه بالفساد. Except if a faqih gives him a fatwa that it is that his fast is considered to be invalid. So qada and kaffarah is due in this case, and this is not considered to be, it's not considered to be a shubha. Um, of course, faqihun doesn't mean Google. So you can't just say, I did a Google search where I asked fiqh GPT or whatever the Mufti GPT or whatever the latest thing is. Yeah, this is not a faqih, right? So this is not it's not lifted by that. Um, so they mean somebody from who from a legitimate source for taking fiqh. And legitimate source means you are legitimately qualified. There's no qualification from just learning random points of knowledge from random sources. That's not how this works. Rather, you can only learn fiqh if you learn it according to a madhab. Right. So this is what it means to learn fiqh. It says وَلَوْ اختاب, but if someone thinks it's a legitimate source, then he's a jahil. He's a kafara and he deserves something more, which I'm too dignified right now to say. A video of a man with a beard. Yeah, that's not acceptable either. We just live in a different time right now where people consume deen from uh, TikTok reels. And this is a really dangerous place to be in. And your responsibility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not lifted by seeing some random reel of some person talking. You have to live in the real world. You have to take deen from trusted sources. That could be any AI bot, right? Could be any guy, some wacko Colombian guy trying to fool all of the mu'mineen, right? All of the believers around the world, all the Muslims, make them do crazy stuff. It could be anything, right? So sorry, no offense to Colombians, right? So, but I just mean that it could be just some random person doing anything. Like anything is possible these days. It doesn't absolve, it doesn't lift your responsibility unless this person is a legitimate source. But the average person is not to know. So how are you supposed to know that? It's not just the guy with the beard. You have to take reasonable means now to determine who is a legitimate source of knowledge. And that's why when somebody, for example, they want to get married or somebody wants to get a divorce or an individual, somebody has died. So now they need somebody to resolve the inheritance question. Do they go and find TikTok reels to answer their questions? Aha, all of a sudden, I need a real scholar. I need to go and find somebody. Why? Because I need to kind of resolve this. Right? I need somebody to help me. Like the TikTok reel's not going to help me get married now. It's not going to help, distribute assets. It's not going to do the real things in the world now. It's not going to help me do that. So now they start looking for a scholar, which is exactly the point. Um, I may have missed this, but is the kafara only applicable to the fast of Ramadan, or would its ruling be applied to nafil and qada fast? No, it's only the kafara is only due for ruining the sanctity of the fast of the month of Ramadan. It doesn't apply to any other fast, even if it's a makeup fast from the month of Ramadan. Or it's an expiatory fast from the month. It's not like expiation and then you do something which necessitates expiation in the expiation. It's like it's never ending like expiations. That's not how it works. Rather, it's only for the month of Ramadan. Finally, he says, وَلَوْ اغْتَابَ فَأَكَلَ مُتَعَمِّدًا عَلَيْهِ الْقَضَاءُ وَالْكَفَّارَ كَيْفَمَا كَانَ. So finally, if there's ghiba, which occurs, and then he thought that it breaks his fast, of course, in both of these latter cases, there are basically hadiths about it. Right? So there are hadiths about it. This is why he's mentioning them. So maybe he's read the hadith and then he saw that somebody who's, slanders another person, then they've, invalidated their fast. So that's why he's deliberately kind of eating something. And that's why he's saying عليه القضاء والكفارة كيفما كان. So even if the faqih, because now even the faqih, even your mufti is a jahil, right? So everyone's jahil, you're a jahil, your dad's a jahil, your mufti is a jahil, right? Like that's what he means. Okay, فصل فيما يتعلق بالتسحر في رمضان والإفطار فيه. So issues now related to the suhoor, yeah, and invalidating fast at that time. So he says, وَمَنْ تَسَحَّرَ بِظَنِّهِ لَيْلًا وَالْفَجْرُ طَالِعٌ أو أفطر كذلك والشمس حية أمسك يومه وقضى ولم يكفر. So he says that whosoever now they had their suhoor, right, which is their morning meal, the pre-dawn meal. He says whilst thinking that it was still night, whereas actually their clock has stopped and Fajr has actually begun. He says أو أفطر كذلك, or he broke his fast similarly, i.e., that it was still 5 minutes till Maghrib, but he thought that Maghrib time had entered. So maybe his clock is 10 minutes fast or something. He says, أمسك يومه. So now this is deliberate. He's conscious of the fast, right? Now he deliberately invalidates his fast, but he didn't mean to ruin the fast, right? So these are two separate cases. So deliberateness without an intention to ruin the fast is different to deliberateness without any intention whatsoever, right? So in the sense that you're just kind of eating and drinking and not paying any attention. So it's only with that type of spiritual state that the kaffarah is actually due. So here he says that only a qada would be due. So فصل في العوارض المبيحة للإفطار في صوم رمضان وغيره. So section now on the permitting excuses for not fasting. For not fasting, he says in the month of Ramadan, also outside the month of Ramadan. So these excuses would apply outside the month of Ramadan, i.e. just generally to any fast. He says, من صام رمضان وخاف زيادة المرض أو تأخير برئه له أن يفطر ويقضي. So somebody who fasts the month of Ramadan and they fear an increase in their sickness or delay in their recovery, he says that it's permissible for them to break the fast and to make it up, or to even omit it altogether. So زيادة المرض أو تأخير برئه. So both of these are considered to be legitimate reasons, but it has to be approved by a an upright Muslim doctor. There's a Muslim doctor who is practicing. That's what it means, right? So now, if you don't know, like who's an adl, then the person is mastur, right? So if you don't know if he's adl or he's fasiq, then he's mastur. So we're looking for somebody who is adl. If that's not the case, then remember you don't ask the doctor for a fatwa. That's not what we're talking about. But if there's some clear sense where you realize that way to delay this, for example, not take the medication as it has been prescribed for you, and that would be harmful, or it's going to kind of delay your recovery from 3 days to 7 days, anything like that, then these are reasonable excuses to invalidate or to postpone the fast or to break the fast if it's the sickness is occurring during one's fast itself, as somebody had asked earlier on. It's also possible to kind of act in this manner if you have past relevant experience, that it's the same issue. For example, somebody experiences seasonal allergies, right? Something like that. So they know that the first 2 weeks of April are really quite tough, right? So my nose is all blocked and I struggle with my breathing and my ears hurt, and but if I take these super strong tablets for like 5 days straight, like 4 times a day, then I'm usually good for the entire period. So if it's something like that, then again, this is fine. but it's not supposed to occur simply on a whim, right? So it's not just on a whim. But if it's clear that some type of medication, right, will actually improve the situation, then it's acceptable. It says وَكَذَا الْمُسَافِرُ, similarly a traveler, وَصَوْمُهُ أَحَبُّ إِنْ لَمْ يَضُرَّهُ, that if you're traveling, you aren't expected to fast. However, if he does fast, it's superior if it is not harmful to him. He says, وَالْمُكْرَهُ بِقَتْلِ نَفْسِهِ, or somebody is coerced such that if they don't break their fast, they will be killed, or they will lose some of the limb or the like, so loss of life or limb, generally speaking, then again, it's permitted for the person to break the fast. والحامل والمرضع إذا خافتا على النفس أو الولد. So a pregnant lady or a nursing lady, if they fear for themselves or their child, again, a genuine fear which is established by, in conjunction, for example, with their midwife, with their doctor, and it's something which is obvious and clear, and it's conceivable. It might be a bit easier to kind of make that judgment for a nursing lady because the baby is right there. She can see the baby, and it's easy to kind of make the judgment. But it might be a bit more difficult for somebody who is pregnant. So the basis is that you must fast. It's not to omit the fast. Unless you have some type of family history, it's really obvious, your weight is really low, there's really obvious signs that this will be harmful to yourself, it'll be harmful to the baby, or somebody is experiencing other things like extreme nauseousness or a sense of fainting or blacking out, or you don't have to wait for this point either if it occurs during the fast. Rather, if one can anticipate that that it's heading in this direction, it's possible, it's and it's heading in this way, then it is reasonable to break the fast like that as well. So you should definitely always consider, take the means, take some himma from the fact that what ladies have done, ladies can do. And it's ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq, try with superior kind of nutritional replenishment, better, and because at the end of the day, you're going to have to make this up later. So whatever you can do now, it's a lot easier to fast when everybody else is fasting. All right, just ask yourself generally, like, is it easy to fast when you're one in a million? Or when you know that 1 billion Muslims are fasting, it's not easier to be with the jama'ah, right? To be with everybody else. So so you can sometimes do your best. So if that means you need to omit a day, for example, 1 day on, 1 day off, then that's also fine. You don't necessarily have to omit it altogether if you can actually manage fasting every second day or fasting every third day. So these are also good, they are good options to consider. Don't simply omit just based on hearsay. That's not how this works. So unless you have clear reason to fear from your doctor, right, from medical professionals and the like, then you simply fast. And of course, like, don't ignore the obvious. Like, there's no taklif with respect to being a fool, right? You are supposed to be an upright, a dignified believer, and you don't ignore the obvious, right? You have a responsibility with respect to yourself and your child. However, it's not at the expense of the Sharia. The Sharia affords you a rukhsa, a dispensation, but it can only be taken legitimately. Right? So you have to make a reasonable judgment. That's why contact your medical professionals, contact like a local scholar, get advice from other practicing women and the like, and see how you can proceed. He said, وَالشَّيْخُ الْفَانِي إِلَّا أَنَّهُ يَفْدِي فَيُطْعِمْ لِكُلِّ يَوْمٍ مِسْكِينًا كَالْفِطْرَةِ. Shaykh al-Fani is an elderly person who is increasing in weakness, that he's not going to be able to fast going forward. In that case, he would simply make fidya payments. So he says for every day of fasting, he would feed a poor person the extent of the sadaqat al-fitr, approximately 2 kilograms of wheat, i.e., or the monetary equivalent of that. وَلَا يَجُوزَ الْفِدْيَةُ لِغَيْرِهِ. Nobody else is permitted to make fidya payments. Even somebody who has a chronic excuse, who's not able to fast, like if they're younger, there's a lot of technological and medicinal advancements happening all the time. You don't have to make those, you don't have to make the payments right now. Rather, if you know that there is never going to be, like in your lifetime, any um, medication or any possibility for you to be able to fast Ramadan, then by all means you can make the payments, right? So, but otherwise you can just simply wait. Of course, not a massive amount. Like you can always just give sadaqat as you go. That's absolutely fine. But the idea is that the sadaqat, like if you do end up hitting 53 and you're now able to fast and you haven't been able to fast for the last 30 years, you'd have to make up 30 years worth of fasts. There's no such thing as I paid sadaqat for that. The sadaqat was a rukhsa, uh, in lieu of the fact that you can't fast or you couldn't fast. Now that you can fast, it's all pure sadaqat. It's just thank you for your righteousness. We have 30 years of qada to do, right? So that's what you want to keep in mind. Um, this is why sometimes ladies and people are affected by this. What if I didn't make up my qada fast by the following year? Nothing is due, right? Nothing is due. He's going to mention a point about qada fast a bit later. Let me see. So, is it better for a pregnant lady if she doubts she can complete the whole fasting day to not fast the day, or to start the day fasting and see if she can complete and then break it if she can't? Or is it better to go with the first out of fear of kaffarah? Not necessarily, because it might turn out that she is actually able. So there's no harm in breaking the fast if you have legitimate reason to do so. And again, it's not just hunger. Sometimes you can fight through the hunger, but it's something more than that. We're looking for some type of sickness, right, at some level. And that's why sometimes the first trimester can be quite difficult. The second trimester can be reasonable for people. And the third trimester might be a kind of hit and miss. People are different. So certainly it shouldn't, you shouldn't just omit it out of fear of kafara, but it would be better if you think that I might be able to make it, to kind of just try to see if you can pull through. And then if it turns out that you can't, then you break the fast and you take a break, and then you think about, maybe I have a day off, maybe I'll try this or try that. And if you genuinely can't, if she genuinely can't do it, then that's fine for her to kind of omit it for the time being and deem herself incapable of fasting, and then just to keep it track of it. How soon complete the Qada fasts? Okay, we'll talk about that later. Inshallah, it's coming up. He says, وَلَوْ قَدَرَ عَلَى الصِّيَامِ يَبْطُلُ حُكْمُ الْفِدَاءِ. So this is what we were just talking about. If he becomes able to fast now, his fidya payments become nullified, because it's a replacement. It's a badal for his fasting. So if he's able to fast, or later becomes able to fast, then, and this applies again, it's not, the fiqh works through systematically. So it applies, the same qawaid are operating in different abwab, in different chapters. So this masala is based on a principle that applies in different chapters as well. So it's not like something to make life miserable for sick people. That's not the point. It's just a qaida, right? This is how this works. He says, وَإِنْ مَاتَ الْمَرِيضُ فِي مَرَضِهِ أَوْ الْمُسَافِرُ فِي سَفَرِهِ لَا قَضَاءَ عَلَيْهِمَا. So if a sick person, he dies during his sickness, or traveler dies during his travel, no qada is due from them. وَإِنْ صَحَّ أَوْ أَقَامَ قَضَيَا مَا قَدَرَا بِلَا شَرْطِ وَلَا. But if they die after they have, the sick person has been well for a period of time, or a traveler becomes resident for a period of time and then they die, then he says they would have to make up the number of days for which they were well for. So, for example, if he had traveled for 10 days, he was resident for 5 days, then he died. So he'd have to make up, i.e., the fidya payments would have been due for 5 days, not 10 days. And that would have only have been realized if he had put it into his will. Um, so he says that it also doesn't need to be consecutive. So actually, I responded to the question a bit too early, because he explains it next. So he says, وَإِنْ مَاتَا وَلَمْ يَقْضِيَا ذَلِكَ فَدَى عَنْهُمَا وَلِيُّهُمَا كَالْفِطْرَةِ بِقَدْرِ مَا قَدَرَا عَلَيْهِ وَشُرِطَ لَهَا الْإِيصَاء. So this is what I was just explaining right now, that if they die and they don't make up those fasts, then the wali would now make the fidya payments for them, which is the extent of the sadaqat al-fitr, as we talked about, to the extent of however long they lived. He says, and isa is required, which means that they have to have put it into their will. So prior to that, he says, so the previous masala, sorry, because I got ahead of myself. The previous masala is that they would make up those fasts which they missed, but they don't have to do so consecutively, right? So now they have, so the traveler had 10 days to make up, or a sick person missed 10 days of the month of Ramadan. They don't have to fast like the 2nd of Shawwal until like the 11th or whatever it might be. They don't have to do that. Rather, they can simply spread them out. That's fine. It's just the qada now which is due. He says, وَتَصِحُ مِنَ الثُّلُث Wasiyah payments are valid from a third. He says, وَفِدْيَةُ كُلِّ صَلَاةٍ كَصَوْمِ يَوْمٍ. So he says, هُوَ الصَّحِيحِ. He said the fidya payment for every salat is equivalent to the fidya payment for 1 day's fasting. He says this is the soundest position because there's a couple of positions on it, which means that you'd have to give fidya payments for 6 prayers, i.e. the 5 obligatory prayers plus the witr. So that's 6 times, if we call sadaqat al-fitr, just randomly, I'm just using a random figure, $5, that's $30 per day, right, that you did not pray. Right, so if you didn't pray those prayers, the wali would now have to pay $30 for every day that you did not pray, i.e. all of those prayers. And of course, if it's just less than that, for example, somebody missed Fajr for 10 years, for example, then it would be just the Sadaqat al-Fitr for each of those for 10 years. It says, وَلَا يَصُومُ عَنْهُ الْوَلِي. The wali would not fast those days on behalf of the deceased. وَلَا يُصَلِّي. Nor would he pray those prayers on behalf of the deceased. Rather, it's no longer due as a bodily act of worship. This is the qaida now. It's a bodily act of worship with respect to each individual. As soon as that person dies, it becomes a monetary act of worship, which means it's not possible for anybody else to actually physically, with their body, take care of it. So that's why the only thing that you can do is make the monetary payments. وَيَقْضِي مَا فَاتَهُ بِإِغْمَاءٍ سِوَى يَوْمٍ حَدَثَ فِيهِ. They also make up the fast, any fasts which are missed as a result of falling unconscious, falls into a coma for a few days, maybe a week, maybe more. So he says, except the day in which it occurred, أو في ليلته. Because on that day he would have had an intention. So the idea is that it's valid for that day, but it's subsequent days they'd have to make up because there was no intention given he was unconscious. وَبِجُنُونٍ غَيْرِ مُمْتَدٍ. And if there is insanity which occurs, but it's not extended, it's not an extended period of time, وَكَذَا بِحَيْضٍ وَنِفَاسٍ, and similarly menstruation and okay. Okay. Oh, I responded to that already. So فصل في مسائل التشبه بالصائمين. So مسائل of تشبه now. Tashabbuh is now when you imitate fasting persons. So he says, وَيُمْسِكُ بَقِيَّةَ يَوْمٍ صَبِيٌّ بَلَغَ. So he says that a child who becomes baligh now, and وَكَافِرٌ أَسْلَمَ, non-Muslim who becomes a Muslim, they would both be expected to to imitate fasting persons, which means to abstain from that which invalidates the fast from the moment the child becomes hits puberty or the non-Muslim becomes Muslim. ولا يقضيان يومهما إن أكلا فيه بعد نية. And they would not be expected to do a qada of this day if they were to eat thereafter, and i.e. if they were to eat after they have made an intention. وليس عليهما قضاء ما مضى وصام ما بعده. And neither is a qada due for the days which have passed. So for example, if this occurred on the 28th of Ramadan, then they would only need to fast the 29th and the 30th. They don't have to do any qadas for the past. It's not due from them. And similarly, this day, it's not lawful for them to eat and drink. It would be haram for them because they are mukallaf at this point. The person is morally responsible, the child and the new Muslim. So this will be haram for them to do it. But were they to do that, no qada would be due and no kaffarah. So even this day, no qada would be due. He says, وَإِذَا قَدِمَ الْمُسَافِرُ أَوْ طَهُرَتِ الْحَائِضُ أَوْ النُّفَسَاءُ فِي بَعْضِ النَّهَارِ أَمْسَكَا بَقِيَّةَ يَوْمِهِمَا. So he says, if the traveler becomes a resident or a menstruating lady or a lady who is experiencing postnatal bleeding becomes ritually pure at some point in the daytime, he says, أَمْسَكَا بَقِيَّةَ يَوْمِهِمَا, they would engage now in this imsak for the remainder of the day, even if it occurred 5 minutes after Fajr time. So they would have to engage in imsak for the rest of the day. But I guess that's a bit different for the musafir, and that's why he also says here that nawal musafiru al-fitra. So a traveler, he intends not to fast. فقدم, he becomes a resident. فنوى الصوم في وقتها. So it's still the morning time, so he intends to fast now. He says صح, it's valid from him. His intention, remember, because he has all the way to the midpoint of the fast to make that intention. So his original intention whilst fasting is not necessarily binding upon him yet. So he says, كما يجب الإتمام على مقيم سافر في يوم منه. He says, a resident now, and people often ask this question, if he were to travel, it is binding upon him to complete the fast. He cannot simply break the fast because he is a traveler now. You don't have that subsequent option. Rather, if you want to omit the fast, you have to be a traveler at the time of the entry of Fajr. As soon as Fajr time enters, at that moment you have to be in a state of travel, which means you have to be outside of your home city and going a travel distance away. So if that's the case, then it would be legitimate for the person to omit the fast of that day. However, if you are traveling, for example, at 12 noon, so you're going to be home until 8 o'clock in the morning, then of course you don't have, and assuming that's after Fajr and everything, you don't have the option to omit the fast. He says, لكنه لو أفطر لا كفارة فيهما. But if this person were to break the fast, i.e., they began the fasting day as a resident, and then later in the day they traveled and they broke the fast, this would be haram for them. They're athim, they're sinful for doing this. However, the kaffarah has its conditions. So this is also considered to be a shubha. So that's why no kaffarah is actually due. So this is why the kaffarah there are details. And it's always worth a person's while to kind of consult with a reliable scholar to kind of make sure that it's actually due from you, because it's not done like for fun. And we just, if you do that for fun, I mean, something wrong with you. But by all means, if you're engaging in ibadah for kafarat for the ummah or whatever, then ahlan wa sahlan. But the idea is that that because it's a difficult task for many people, if not most individuals, then it's always worth your while kind of making sure that it's actually due from you, because there might be a shubha that you're not necessarily aware of, and the shubhat, the hudud and the kafarat are like the hudud in that al-hudud tudra bishubuhat, that they are warded off by various types of shubhas. But as we saw previously, not every type of shubha is actually considered. So it's not every conceivable there are shubha, rather there are qawaid and dawabit. Dean says, does this also apply to a person who was Muslim in the past but left Islam in terms of practicing acts of Islam and then later realized and reverts to Islam? Does he have to make up the fast for the years he wasn't practicing Muslim? So, so left Islam doesn't mean that somebody is simply not practicing. So that alone is not sufficient. Rather, there has to be a rejection of Iman, a rejection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. So in the heart is now convinced of some type of kufr. So that's very different to somebody who is just Muslim and they didn't really think about it and they didn't really practice. And maybe they weren't taught and they didn't grow up in a religious household, but they are Muslims and they have a Muslim name and their parents are Muslim and they go to Jumu'ah, or at least they go to the Eid every year. So otherwise Islam is kind of there manifesting. Maybe they found Islam later in like the university or college or something else. So of course somebody like that, they would have to make up that which is past. It's only somebody who leaves it all. They're convinced by some um, some Buddhist guy or somebody from, some Hindu guru kind of convinced them of something, and then they did that for a bit, and then they realized, then they came back to Islam or something like that. Then it's legitimate that they wouldn't necessarily have to make up for anything for that period. But if that's not the case, and again, a lot of these types of things best to kind of consult. فصل في صوم التطوع. So voluntary fast now. He says ويلزم صوم نفل شرع فيه أداء وقضاء إلا في الأيام المنهية. So any fast you begin, you must necessarily complete it. He says except during the prohibited days, i.e. Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Adha, and the 3 days following Eid al-Adha. These are the Ayyam al-Tashriq. So 5 days in the year where it's prohibited to fast. He says ولا يفطر بغير عذر. So if he initiates any fast, then he must, like this nafil fast, then he must necessarily complete it, except if it's on those days, because if he does so on the days of Eid, or it's the day 13 of the Ayyam al-Tashriq, maybe it's a random Thursday, for example, he starts fasting, he doesn't realize he doesn't realize that it's the last day of Ayyam al-Tashriq, and then he finds out that he would break the fast. So he says, وَلَا يُفْطِرُ بِغَيْرِ عُذْرٍ. So you'd not break the fast without an excuse. وَيُبَاحُ لِعُذْرٍ. And it's lawful if you have an excuse. وَعَلَيْهِ الْقَضَاءُ. And a qada would be due because it's binding as soon as you initiate it. It says, وَالضِّيَافَةُ عُذْرٌ. So if you are a guest or even a host, then this is considered to be an excuse, but it's only an excuse if somebody if somebody it's before it's before midday, and the person has a firm intention to do the qada, and importantly the other individual would be hurt or harmed by your not breaking your fast. So these are the conditions for the ضيافة. Of course, the only exception to this is parents. So with parents, you actually can go even past midday. That if past midday, it's like post dhuhr lunch or something. Um, Not if you knew it in advance, like then there's something wrong with you that you knew there was like a dinner, but then you decided that I'm still going to fast this day. Then there's something wrong with you. But the point is that it just happens, right? You just show up, and then maybe there's like other family, and maybe they want you to eat, and it's that type of thing. Then it shows you it's not, look, the deen is not just about you and your personal feelings. It's me, my worship, my ibadah, my Lord, my akhirah. Of course, that's with respect to the fara'id, right? And and that's with respect to ta'at and ma'asi. But the point here is, at this point, this is just an effort. And there are huquq. People have rights. And if and when things like this occur, then the point is that you have to consider that what is of the greatest benefit, right? What is more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this context? And that's why the masala is actually transmitted, right? That it's better to kind of take into consideration one's brethren, right, and one's parents, i.e., the rights of them. Again, in those specific circumstances that you know that you'll make up the fast, and you know that from yourself that you'll be able to do that. And secondly, that they would be hurt thereby. Right? So that's that point. Then he says, "Faslun fi sawmin nathar," so vowed fasts. Are there any situations under which you are allowed to introduce a break in the consecutiveness condition for kaffarah? Kaffarat are coming. So he's going to talk about the kaffarah very shortly, but the short answer is no. Doing the fasting consecutively is required. It says, إذا قال لله علي صوم يوم النحر أفطر وقضى. So if he makes a vow to fast on the day of Eid, أي Eid al-Adha, he says he would skip the fast and he would make it up. When صام فيه يخرج عن العهدة, and if he does actually fast, he would be an athim, he would be sinful, but he would have fulfilled his vow. وإن نوى يمينا فعليه كفارة يمين مع القضاء إذا أفطر. And if he intends also an oath thereby, then he says the kafara would be required, i.e., kafara, an expiation for an oath, and also the qada if he breaks the fast. ولو قال لله علي أن أصوم هذه السنة لزمه. So here I think there's something missing from the matan. So he says أن أصوم هذه السنة لزمه, and then it should be لزمه صوم تلك السنة فيصومها لكنه أفطر يوم الفطر والنحر وأيام التشريق وقضاها. So again, so it should say here لله علي أن أصوم هذه السنة لزمه صوم تلك السنة لزمه صوم تلك السنة فيصومها لكنه أفطر, and then the rest is there. So it's just like 4 words missing. So if he says, makes a vow now to fast this year, then it becomes binding upon him to do so, and he wouldn't fast on the 2 Eids, i.e., these 5 days, and he would make those up. فإن صام فيها يخرج عن العهدة. And if he does actually fast those days, and again he's athim for fasting those days, sinful, but he would have exited from his statement. وكذا إذا لم يعين. And similarly, if he doesn't specify it, لكن شرط التتابع. He doesn't say this year, for example, but he says consecutively, right? So the same thing would apply. He says ولو لم يشترط التتابع لم يجوز صوم هذه الأيام. So the same thing would apply if he doesn't say this year, but he says, I make it mandatory upon myself to fast a year consecutively. In that case, if he fasts those days, right, then he would have fulfilled his vow. If he doesn't make the condition, i.e., this consecutive condition, لم يجوز صوم هذه الأيام. So he says it's not permissible then to fast these days because you don't have an udhr in this case. Not that the udhr makes it okay, but the udhr kind of it lessens it in the sense that it was the dictate, it was the entailment of your vow. He says, وَعَلَيْهِ كَفَّارَةُ يَمِينٍ إِنْ أَرَادَ يَمِينًا, and anytime he intends an oath, then he would also have to pay the kaffarah, the expiation for an oath, which is again to free a slave, for example, or it's to feed 10 poor persons or to clothe them with average kind of clothing. It says, وَمَنْ أَصْبَحَ يَوْمَ النَّحْرِ صَائِمًا. So somebody who begins the Eid al-Adha whilst fasting, ينبغي أن يفطر ولا شيء عليه. Then he should break his fast and nothing is due from him. So you don't have to do a qada for this, right? Rather, because this was not a day which you should have been legitimately fasting on anyway. So if you did start fasting, then it doesn't, the normal qaida doesn't apply because that applies to days which are salih, which are legitimate for fasting. So here there's not a legitimate day for fasting, so it doesn't apply. He says, وَمَنْ نَذَرَ نَذْرًا مُطْلَقًا أو معلقا بشرط ووجد وفى به إلا إذا وصل به إن شاء الله تعالى. So anybody who makes a generic vow or a conditional vow. So if I pass my driving test, I will fast 3 days, something like that. He says, if that is met, the condition is met, then he would do so. He says, or he'd be obliged to do so. He says, إلا إذا وفى به, إلا إذا وصل به إن شاء الله تعالى. Again, this is the qaida, a maxim with respect to istithna. So when it comes to making some exceptional statements and making things dependent upon the mashi'a of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the entailment of the statement is now negated. Right? So the hukm and the consequence of the statement is now negated. And again, this is a qaida which extends across different abwab. So that's why he's also mentioning it over here, that the same thing would apply, that if you were to bring inshallah into this, it would negate it. It's a فصل في مسائل قضاء رمضان ويقضي رمضان وصلا وفصلا. So he would make up the fast of the month of Ramadan consecutively or non-consecutively. He says that it's not wajib upon him to do those fasts immediately after the month of Ramadan. Rather, it's possible to delay them. He says, فَإِنْ أَخَرَ الْقَضَاءَ حَتَّى دَخَلَ رَمَضَانُ آخَرَ قَدَّمَ الْأَدَاءَ عَلَى الْقَضَاءِ. So if he does end up delaying the fast, i.e. his makeup fast, until another Ramadan enters, then he would give precedence to the ada over the qada, i.e. you fast this year's Ramadan, not last year's Ramadan at this time. Of course, it wouldn't even be valid even if he tried to fast last year's Ramadan, that it would still count for this year's, but he's just saying as a principle that you'd give precedence to this, and there's no fidya, nothing is due for this. Of course, it's ideal and it's recommended to kind of take care of one's duties, i.e. like the makeup fast right away, but it's possible to delay them, particularly when somebody has an excuse, and part of the excuse, for example, for a man might be that he's earning a living and it's difficult and he's working hard, and and there's a lot, he's juggling a lot in life, so he doesn't have the opportunity to kind of do that right now. Similarly, with a mother, she might have multiple children and there's a lot of duties and responsibilities, and it's tiring to kind of take care of them, and she might not be able to do that right now, so she can wait until the kids get a bit older, for example. But again, if she's able to do something in the meantime, then that's always good. Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Thanks for sharing that, Daniel. فصل في الكفارة هي ككفارة الظهار. So as we talked about before, the kafara is akin to the kafara of dhihar. We talked about what dhihar was earlier, likening his wife to his mother, i.e. to an impermissible part of his mother, i.e. with respect to him. فيعتق رقبة إن وجد. So he would free a slave if he has one. He says, وَإِلَّا يَصُومُ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ. Otherwise, he would fast 2 months consecutively. لَيْسَ فِيهَا رَمَضَانُ وَأَيَّامٌ مَنْهِيَةٌ. and Ramadan cannot manifest in that time, neither can the impermissible days. So 2 months consecutively, either you begin at the beginning of the calendar month, we're talking about the lunar months here. If you do so, then even if it's 58 days, i.e. 29/29, or it's 59 days, right, 30/29 or 29/30, or it's 60 days, it would be valid. If you begin outside, i.e. that you don't start at the beginning of the month, then you would need to do 60 days. Right? So then it has to be 60 days. He says, فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَيُطْعِمُ 60 مِسْكِينًا كَالْفِطْرَةِ أَوْ قِيمَةِ ذَلِكَ. He says if he's unable to do so, he's unable to fast for that period. So he's too sick, for example, to be able to fast for that period. He says then he would feed 60 poor persons the amount of sadaqat al-fitr, which is 2 kilograms of wheat, or the monetary equivalent of that. وتصح الإباحة في الكفارات والفدية, and the دون الصدقات والعشر, and the ibaha, just a technical point, that if you allow for them to eat, this is ibaha. So rather than making them the owner of the food, you simply prepare it and allow them to eat from it. This is also legitimate for the kafarat and also for the fidya. But he says it's not acceptable for the sadaqat, nor is it acceptable for the ushur. He said, وَشَرْطُ غَدَآنِ أَوْ عَشَاءَنِ مُشْبِعَانِ. And what's the condition here? He says it's 2 filling meals. So one in the morning, one in the evening. أو غداء وعشاء. Yeah, sorry, he says either 2 morning or 2 evening meals, or one in the morning, one in the evening. فإن أعطى فقيرا شهرين صح. And if you were to give it to one person for an extended period, say for the 60 days, or 60 times rather, then he says that this would be legitimate. And it says ولو في يوم لا. I guess it wouldn't work with food. But if you were to give the amount in money or the like on a single day, then this would not be valid. إلا عن يومه, that it would all count as one payment. It says وَلَمْ يَجُزْ لِلْعَبْدِ إِلَّا الصَّوْمِ. And the abd, the only thing that he can do, because he doesn't own anything else, is to fast. Okay, alhamdulillah. So that completes the section on fasting. So he has a final his final comments on the i'tikaf. Yeah, could you explain the sentence وَلَا فِي يَوْمٍ لَا إِلَّا عَنْ يَوْمِهِ? Yeah, sorry, a bit confused by that. Yeah, where is it? Yeah, so he's talking about the kaffarah here. So what does he do? The person, he says فَإِنْ أَعْطَى فَقِيرًا شَهْرَيْنِ صَحَّ. So if he gives one person the amount over 2 months, this is valid. وَلَوْ فِي يَوْمٍ لَا. But if he gives 60 days worth to the individual, to the poor person, on one day, it's not valid. إِلَّا عَنْ يَوْمِهِ, except for that day, which means that it counts as one payment. Now he only has to do 59 other payments, even though he gave a massive amount. So again, the kaffarah is of no consideration here, just like if somebody, for example, under normal circumstances, 2 witnesses are required. So if you bring 17 witnesses, It doesn't change anything. It's not like, oh, we're gonna give him like a bigger, he has to pay like even more now because you bought 17 witnesses. But it doesn't change. It doesn't change the hukam. Rather, the hukam pertains to these two. So the ibah. So yeah. Sorry, I think we talked about the ibaha already. The kafarat and the fidya versus sadaqat. So ibaha is when you give the food, sadaqat, sadaqat fitr, zakat, and the like. You can't just offer it like that. Rather, tamlik is a shart that's required. That's why there's a distinction there. فصل في ماهية الاعتكاف وركنه وشرائطه. He says الاعتكاف سنة مؤكدة. So the i'tikaf now is an emphasized sunnah. وهو لبث صائم في مسجد بنيته. So it's the remaining of a fasting person in a mosque with an intention. وأقله نفلا ساعة. And the least of it, a voluntary i'tikaf, is a single moment. Right, so it's a single moment. Single moment according to, of course, Muhammad. So according to Abu Hanifa, it's not all this riwayah of Muhammad and Abu Hanifa. He says, so Abu Hanifa, there's would say a day. I can't remember now if this is Muhammad's riwayah. And Abu Hanifa, it's definitely his position. I feel like it's also a riwayah from Abu Hanifa. Mm. Doesn't really specify much over here, but he does say it's a Zahir riwayah because Muhammad said it, but I think there's some discussion as well. So if that's the case, then that might actually be the riwayah of Muhammad from Abu Hanifa as well. So that's fine. Of course, sa'atu means a moment, not like an hour. So I've seen some translations of it, not this text, but sometimes I've seen like you do this for like an hour, right? So this is a mistake. The ulama, they say explicitly, they explain what the sa'a means. So they mean like sa'a falakiya. They don't mean like an actual hour. They mean just a moment. إذا ولا يخرج من المسجد إلا لحاجة طبيعية كالبول والغائط أو شرعية كالجمعة. So the person would not leave the mosque now unless he has like a natural need, like he has to urinate or relieve himself. He says, or if it's a legal need, such as the fact that he has to attend the Friday prayers, and the Friday prayers would not normally be offered in all of the masajid, rather it would be in the jamia. So he would have to leave his mosque, which might just be a regular congregational mosque, and head out to the gathering, kind of like the large mosque in the city. He said, وَلَا يَمْكُثُ بَعْدَ فَرَاغِهِ مِنَ الطُّهُورِ. He says he wouldn't remain outside the mosque now after he has entered into a state of purification, because that would invalidate it as well. You can't simply just kind of dawdle outside the mosque. Rather, you can legitimately leave for a need like that, renewing your wudu and so on and so forth. That's fine. He says, وَيَخْرُجُ إِلَى الْجُمْعَةِ. You have a need to kind of relieve yourself and renew your wudu. So things like that would be okay. He said, وَيَخْرُجُ إِلَى الْجُمْعَةِ بَعْدَ زَوَالِ الشَّمْسِ. So when would you leave for the Friday prayers now? He says after midday is hit. He says ويصلي السنن, and then you'd pray the sunnahs. ولو أقام في المسجد أكثر من ذلك لا يفسد اعتكافه. If he remains in the mosque for longer than that, it wouldn't invalidate his i'tikaf. Why? Because he's in a mosque right now, so effectively his i'tikaf is continuing, and that's contrary to the case when he's outside the mosque. فلو خرج من المسجد ساعة بغير عذر فسد اعتكافه. And were he to exit from the mosque for a moment without an excuse, his i'tikaf would be nullified. والمرأة تعتكف في مسجد بيتها. And a lady would perform the i'tikaf in the mosque of her home, which is a part, an area of her home, perhaps a small room or an area of a larger room, which she has specified as being her prayer area, and she can that's effectively considered to be the mosque, quote unquote, of her home. And she can perform the i'tikaf there, and should be expected to remain within that space for the entire period, with the exception of leaving, for example, for a natural need. So to use the, to go to the bathroom or something like that. What will be the sources for understanding Imam Abu Hanifa's position more authentically through the riwayahs of Muhammad and Abu Yusuf? That is the authentic way of figuring out Abu Hanifa's position. Yeah, there's no objective third option. This is it. So it's a فصل فيما يكره للمعتكف وما لا يكره ويأكل المعتكف ويشرب وينام ويبيع ويشتري في المسجد وكره يحضار المبيع فيه والصمت والتكلم إلا بخير. So a mu'takif person at i'tikaf now, he would eat and drink and sleep and buy whatever he needs, which is of that which is a necessity. Even and sorry, he says sell and buy. He says within the mosque. Right, so everything would take place within the mosque. He wouldn't leave for these types of things. Rather, he'd only leave when he has a legitimate need to leave. And although the mosque is not a place to engage in business and activities, it's kind of a given that he has to kind of support himself. There might be something that he needs to do. But you shouldn't kind of just, well, I work from home, I'll just go and do my work in the mosque and I'll do i'tikaf. That's not what they meant. But they meant that somebody, for example, they have to buy something for their family, or it's that type of thing. It's a more simple kind of version of it. And then it's makruh to bring in the sale items, i.e. inside the mosque, to occupy the space of the mosque. With that makes it more like a marketplace. To remain silent, considering and thinking that this is ibadah. So there's no ibadah of remaining silent in the i'tikaf. And that's why he says, وَتَكَلَّمُوا إِلَّا بِخَيْرٍ. But the idea is remaining silent to avoid ill speech. This is praiseworthy, right? So otherwise, talking is khair. Like if you talk about the good, like if it's a majlis, if it's a dars, somebody's asking questions, it's a lecture, all of these types of things, mudarasatul ilm, this is all fine. Even asking people how they are and everything is all fine. What they mean is they shouldn't be just kalimat amma. Ask about the recent sports game, and ask about the dunya. It's better to remain silent, right? From all of that. But one shouldn't kind of behave as if silence is a virtue, right? That's not what is matlub. Silence is makruh, right? So you shouldn't, like, I say salam alaikum to you, don't respond to me. This is not, I'm being silent right now because i'tikaf, this is wrong. Here's a question. If a woman does i'tikaf at home, can she exit to help the kids, give them food, help them in the bathroom? Will that invalidate it because it's not a natural need for her? This would invalidate it. Because this is not, you just tell them to come into my mosque. Come into my mosque and I'll help you. Choose a mosque at home, which is near the bathroom. So you can stand at the edge of your mosque and help them in the bathroom. Yeah, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem like something like that would be legitimate. Yeah, unless you can kind of facilitate for everything to kind of be close to you. Even then, you couldn't necessarily leave to the bathroom. That alone wouldn't be acceptable, unless you have like a need. Then he says, فصل فيما يحرم على المعتكف وما يفسد اعتكاف وما يفسد الاعتكاف, sorry. He says ويحرم على المعتكف الوطء ودواعيه. So what's haram for the person in a state of i'tikaf? It is intercourse and its preliminaries. He says, eye touching and kissing and anything of the sort. He says, فإن جامع ليلا أو نهارا, so if he engaged in intercourse during the night or during the day, عامدا أو ناسيا, whether deliberately or forgetfully, بطل اعتكافه. So his i'tikaf is nullified. ولو جامع فيما دون الفرج أو قبل أو لمس فأنزل يبطل اعتكافه. And similarly, if he engaged in intercourse somewhere else, I دون الفرج means that he's going to ejaculate somewhere else, like on the body, not in the normal place. He says أو قبل, or he kisses or touches and then ejaculates thereafter. He says his i'tikaf is also going to be annulled. So it's annulled through both of these things. Finally, he says فصل في النذر بالاعتكاف. نذر اعتكاف أيام لزمه بلياليها ولاء بلا شرطه. So if he vows now to perform the i'tikaf for a number of days, then it is due with its nights consecutively, even if he does not make that condition. So he makes a vow to perform the i'tikaf for 5 days. The nights are included and it's also consecutive. وصحت نية الأيام خاصة. He can also exclude the nights. He can also exclude the nights, which means that he'll be in a state of i'tikaf during the daytimes and the daytimes alone. Right, so he wouldn't need to be there at night, i.e. from Maghrib till Fajr. He wouldn't need to be there, but he would need to be there from Fajr until Maghrib. It says, وَالْمُثَنَّى كَالْجَمْعِ. And 2 days is like multiple, i.e. more than 2. It's like 3 and more, basically. Which means that if he does the same for 2 days, then it'd have to be, again, consecutive and the nights would be included. So Alhamdulillah, الذي بنعمته تتم الصالحات. Alhamdulillah, this is the end of the Madhar al-Anwar, at least the matn of the Madhar al-Anwar. And I pray that that was a useful reading and beneficial reading, and hopefully an opportunity to review these ahkam. Of course, there's always a lot more to discuss. There's many qawa'id, there's many things that we perhaps glossed over that we didn't necessarily get into. But as I mentioned at the beginning, that it's not necessarily the maqsad of a gathering like this to do all of those particular kind of things, but it's another opportunity for us to kind of consider these masalas, to see how the ulama are presenting them, and perhaps something that we have something in our hands that we can walk away with, and perhaps think about further if there was anything new or different, if there are new qawaid or principles or new perspectives which were uncovered from this reading, then that's something that we can kind of think about more looking ahead, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala. And inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to continue to benefit from each other's company. Yeah, yeah, the longest one, yes. And maybe I've missed this. What if a person wasn't aware of much of these rulings and he may have done acts which would have nullified his fast? Does that mean he also has to perform the kaffarah? As I mentioned before, that when it comes to some of these things, if somebody wasn't aware of certain matters, then it always makes sense for them to kind of reach out to, their local scholar, somebody, a reliable scholar that they trust, and try to work through to determine whether qada fasts are actually due, or if there's any kafara which is due, and not to try to do like apply a fatwa to oneself, which might make life difficult for oneself, particularly when it's not necessarily due, and there's other things which can be due in that time as well. Like there might be other duties which are also required from a person. Let's start a group reading for the Sharh, the Ramadan intensive. Inshallah, sometime. I'm not sure if we could do that this time. It would still be quite a mission, really, to get through the whole thing in the month of Ramadan. You'd have to be reading it like for multiple hours a day, and dedicate yourself to it. But it certainly would be a beneficial endeavor. But inshallah, as long as we've had an opportunity to to go through the meta now, then that hopefully gives some impetus to some of you to kind of look into the commentary a little bit and to try to explore some of the masalas. And it's good to kind of see the scope, which is one of the reasons why we're reading the Rasa'i'l generally, but also now doing something that's a bit more like a risala-matn type of thing. But you can kind of see where there were various choices that were being made, and okay, well, there's this ta'leel and there's that ta'leel, and there's also an issue like this and like that. Kaffarah is due according to this position. Kaffarah is not due according to that position. Fiqh is an incredibly deep and vast science, and every bab is filled with all kinds of tremendous fiqh, and you cannot simply just study it like twice, like some basic method, and imagine that you have learnt this. You might learn something well enough to be able to practice it, but it's something else to kind of really understand the intricacies of the science. That's why 800 pages is still only um, one of the ulama trying to express the masail. If you look at some of the other the volumes that we have, you will find pages and pages of discussions, right? And it's really buhur. And but the way to kind of really understand them is to understand the usul. And if you understand the usul of the abwab and of the masail, you will understand everything that they're saying and all the tafri'at and everything. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for continued tawfiq. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us reach the blessed month of Ramadan. اللهم بارك لنا في رجب وشعبان وبلغنا رمضان. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it our greatest Ramadan yet, and for us to benefit from all of the barakat and the anwar of this blessed month, and to allow us to continue to gather together for his sake, and to benefit from the kalimat and the ibarat and the kutub of the great ulama of our tradition. وصلي وسلم وبارك وكرم وشرف وأنعم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله تعالى خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.